It didn't look like the start of a comeback. It looked like Eastbourne playing out all over again. Alex Eala had already dropped the first set, and across the net, Mayajoint was swinging with the same fearless confidence that had carried her through the opening round of Wimbledon. The Australian looked completely in control, and for anyone who remembered their last meeting, the pattern felt uncomfortably familiar. A year earlier, Joint had broken Eala's heart in the Eastbourne final, erasing 4 championship points before walking away with the biggest title of her young career. That loss never really registered as just another defeat on Eala's record. It was the kind of result that lingers long after the trophy has been handed out. Now the two players were standing across the net again. Different tournament, different surface, same opponent, and after one set, the same outcome seemed to be writing itself. Nobody inside the All England club realized they were about to watch one of the most dramatic turnarounds of the entire tournament. Over the next 9 games, Mayajoint wouldn't win a single one. The final score would read 3-6, 6-2, 6-0, but that scoreline alone doesn't explain why the match mattered, or why Eala looked like an entirely different competitor once the second set began. It also doesn't explain how painful memory from more than a year earlier quietly shaped one of the biggest wins of her career. To understand it, rewind to Eastbourne, June 2025, the biggest final either woman had reached at that point. The match swung one way, then the other. Eala came within a single point of the title. Then another, then 2 more, for championship points in total, and she couldn't convert a single one. Joint refused to fold, turned the match around, and left with the trophy after one of the most dramatic finishes of the season. For Joint, it became the breakthrough people still talk about. For Eala, it became the match she couldn't quite shake, not because she collapsed, and not because she played badly, but because she had been close enough to taste it. Those are often the hardest defeats to process. Tennis rarely gives players time to sit with a loss like that. Another tournament arrives, another flight, another opponent. But some results quietly travel with you, and Eastbourne was one of them. Over the following year, Eala kept climbing the rankings, picking up wins over established names, refining her game in ways that rarely made headlines. Some of it happened in the gym, some in practice sessions nobody watched, and some of it came simply from understanding why she had lost matches like that one in the first place. Joint's rise, meanwhile, never slowed down. Still only 20, she had built a reputation for fearless shot-making and composure that belied her age. And by the time Wimbledon arrived, she was no longer just a promising name, she was one of the most talked-about players on tour, especially after stunning the tennis world by beating Serena Williams in the opening round. When the draw paired her against Eala again, the previews wrote themselves. Could Joint beat her twice on one of the sport's biggest stages, or had the player she denied in Eastbourne spent a year quietly building the answer? The first set seemed to settle it. Joint dictated with her forehand, served with total confidence, and Eala never found the rhythm that had carried her through the first round. 6-3, 1 set from the finish line. If you only glanced at the scoreboard, there was every reason to think this story would end exactly like the last one. But Eala wasn't looking at the scoreboard, she was looking for patterns. Because sometimes a match isn't won by playing better, it's won by understanding an opponent better than you did the last time you faced them. What she found was simple but important. Whenever Joint landed the first aggressive forehand, she controlled the rally completely, dictating where the next ball would go before Eala had a chance to reset. Trying to out-hit that pattern wasn't realistic. Breaking it was. So the adjustment wasn't one spectacular winner, it was restraint. Eala stopped treating every short ball as an invitation to go for broke and started asking Joint to play one more shot before she committed to taking control herself. It sounds small. On a professional court, it's anything but. Elite players build their confidence around rhythm, and interrupting that rhythm even slightly makes every decision that follows more complicated. The rallies began stretching, just a little longer each time, not enough for a casual viewer to notice, but more than enough for 2 professionals who make a living reading tiny shifts. Joint was still producing winners, just less often. The easy holds from the first set turned into 30-all, then deuce again. Momentum in tennis rarely announces itself. It accumulates, one difficult hold and one slightly deeper return at a time, until those separate moments stop feeling separate and simply become the match. This was the real difference from Eastbourne. A year earlier, with a title in sight, Eala had occasionally rushed to finish points a beat too early, understandable, given what was at stake. At Wimbledon, she was more measured, more disciplined, more willing to trust that the right opening would eventually arrive. That's one of the least glamorous parts of getting better. Improvement isn't always adding something new. Sometimes it's learning what to stop doing. Across the net, Joint wasn't suddenly playing badly. That would be the easy explanation, and it wouldn't be an accurate one. She kept playing the same aggressive tennis that had carried her through Eastbourne and past Serena Williams. The problem was that those same decisions were no longer producing the same results, and doubt has a way of creeping in disguised as questions. Go bigger or safer? Change direction or trust what's worked before? Professional tennis gives you almost no time to answer any of them before the next point begins. The first break didn't come from nowhere. It felt inevitable, built over nearly half an hour of accumulating pressure. There was barely a celebration, just a glance toward her box and a quiet walk back to the baseline. That reaction said everything. She hadn't come back simply to level the match. She believed she'd finally solved it. For the first time all afternoon, Joint was reacting to Eala, not the other way around. From there, the gap only widened. 3 straight games became 4, then 5. The crowd sensed something shifting, not because Eala was producing outrageous winners, but because Joint no longer looked free. Every service game turned into a test. Every extended rally ended with another reminder that nothing was coming for free out there. It wasn't dramatic pressure, it was relentless pressure, and that's often much harder to play through. By the middle of the deciding set, the outcome felt settled, not because Joint had stopped fighting, but because the emotional current of the match had completely flipped. A year earlier in Eastbourne, Eala had been the one searching for answers late in a match. Now the roles had reversed entirely. Eala never let herself get distracted by the scoreline or play like she was chasing revenge. She played like she was finishing a job, and that discipline carried all the way through to the final point. 3-6, 6-2, 6-0. 9 consecutive games. Another milestone for Philippine tennis, and a place in the 3rd round at Wimbledon. The handshake lasted only a few seconds and revealed nothing new. The scoreboard had already told the story the crowd would remember. But scorelines never show you what a player had to become before a result like that was possible. The Eala who walked off court that day wasn't the same one who'd left Eastbourne heartbroken more than a year earlier. Back then she left with disappointment. This time she left with perspective. The difference wasn't raw ability, it was trust. Trust in her preparation, trust in her decision-making, and the belief that she no longer needed to force matches in order to win them. None of this erases what Joint has built. The same fearless tennis that won her the Eastbourne title and helped topple Serena Williams is still there. And so is the talent. Young players rarely move in a straight line. There are weeks when everything clicks and afternoons that expose the next thing to work on. This was one of the latter, and the rivalry itself now feels far more interesting than it did a year ago. 1 match apiece, both going the distance, both forcing real adjustments from 2 players who are clearly still evolving. But there was no time to dwell on any of it, because the reward for beating Joint wasn't a chance to relax. It was a 3rd-round meeting with one of the biggest names in the sport, world number 4 IgaSwiatek. For a lot of young players, an opponent of that caliber feels overwhelming. For Eala, it represents something different, a measuring stick. Not just to see whether she can win, but to see whether the growth that carried her past Joint can hold up against one of the very best players on the planet. That's how careers actually get built, not by avoiding the hardest opponents, but by earning the right to face them. For Philippine tennis, moments like this reach far beyond one player. Every deep run at a Grand Slam gives young athletes back home another reason to believe that path is possible, and that quiet impact tends to outlast the headlines by a long way. It's tempting to call this match pure revenge. And there's some truth buried in that. Eastbourne left questions unanswered, and Wimbledon answered several of them. But revenge alone doesn't explain the win. Growth does. The ability to learn from a painful defeat, the discipline to make adjustments instead of excuses, and the patience to accept that improvement doesn't always show itself until the biggest moments demand it. None of those qualities guarantee future titles. What they offer is opportunity, and when the next one arrived against the very player who had once denied her a trophy, Alex Eala was ready in a way she hadn't been before. That's why this match matters. Not the 6-0 final set, not the revenge narrative, not even the 3rd-round berth at Wimbledon. It matters because it proves something every great player eventually has to learn. Losing a big match can define your memories, but it doesn't have to define your future. More than a year after Eastbourne, Alex Eala finally closed that chapter, not by rewriting the past, but by playing well enough to make it part of a much bigger story. And judging by how she's still improving, that story is far from finished.